Chapter 5 Secret Agendas 1. Bruce explains his reason for snapping. This scene, presented as an intense interview opening in Chapter 5 of The King's Omen, serves as a raw, revealing dialogue that unpacks Bruce Edwards' complex psyche and violent past, probing what drives a man to snap into brutality. The reporter's probing questions highlight Bruce's history of violence, emphasizing acts such as mutilation, assault, and extortion even before fully entering the criminal underworld. This framing challenges common narratives about violence as an inherent trait of gangsters, instead pointing to a deeper psychological unraveling. Bruce's smirk and refusal to be psychoanalyzed suggest a hardened, guarded personality shaped by hardship and possibly resigned to his fate. His dismissal of the search for one moment that caused his violence rejects simplistic psychological explanations in favor of a lived experience shaped by continuous hardship. It's called life. The reporter's detailed account of Bruce's notorious family history, including betrayals, mental health struggles, and deaths such as Izzy Edwards killing his brother Zabadier Edwards in paranoia, frames a pattern of intergenerational trauma and psychological dysfunction. This context helps explain Bruce's violent tendencies not as isolated incidents, but as expressions within a legacy of chaos and trauma. Bruce's refusal to engage deeply psychologically hints at his desire to control the narrative and maintain dignity. This response portrays a man forced into roles by bloodline and circumstance, yet unwilling to be reduced to a subject of clinical analysis. Analytical insights, violence as a life cycle. Bruce's violent acts precede formal gangster status, indicating trauma and environment as crucial factors. Intergenerational trauma, family history filled with betrayal, mental breakdowns, and violence points to inherited psychological scars. Rejection of simplistic analysis. Bruce refuses reductionist psychological interpretations, emphasizing lived complexity over clinical labels. Narrative control. Bruce's smirk and dismissal represent self-preservation and control over his story. Psychological ambivalence. The scene conveys tension between acknowledging trauma and asserting personal agency. Theme of inevitability. The interview frames Bruce's story as a broader commentary on life's harsh realities rather than a singular breaking point. 2. Bruce's terrifying dream. This dream sequence is rich with symbolic imagery that conveys Bruce Edwards' deep psychological conflicts, emotional pain, and feelings of responsibility for ongoing violence and suffering, all of which permeate the King's Omen narrative. The recurring motif of teeth in Bruce's dream is significant. Teeth often symbolize personal power, identity, communication, and vitality. Bruce pulling teeth to load his gun suggests that his own strength and voice are being weaponized, yet also lost or sacrificed in the process. Psychologically, this can represent vulnerability, loss of control, and the fracture of self, key themes for Bruce, who grapples with his violent past and its destructive consequences. The people on fire symbolize intense pain and torment, those affected by Bruce's actions or the chaos surrounding him. The parents' evil grins could indicate a sense of inevitable doom or the inescapable wrath of those affected, highlighting guilt and the weight of Bruce's impact. The fiery imagery, the melting away of communication, teeth/tongue, and the self-inflicted gunshot reflect themes of self-destruction and the emotional inferno that Bruce endures. Fire often symbolizes transformation, but also annihilation, emphasizing Bruce's burning guilt and the potential for both destruction and renewal. Waking in a cold sweat to news about Tony Gaddy's disappearance connects the dream's symbolic torment to real-world consequences and tensions, suggesting Bruce's subconscious processing of events and his role within the ongoing violence. Detailed symbolic and psychological analysis. Teeth as power and vulnerability. Teeth represent Bruce's identity and capacity for violence, pulled out to fuel further violence, but weakening his agency. Fire as pain and transformation. The burning people symbolize suffering inflicted and endured, reflecting guilt and subconscious crisis. Communication breakdown. Missing teeth and a bloody mouth symbolize damaged communication and voice, literally and metaphorically silenced. Self-destruction. Shooting himself with a tooth-loaded gun signals Bruce's suicidal tendencies and internalized torment. Once again, fire is represented when fire comes out the back of his head from the gunshot wound instead of blood. This could also mean Bruce's mind is shifting more towards chaos and brutality. Guilt and inevitability. The people you haven't affected yet emphasizes Bruce's awareness of spreading pain and inescapable consequences. Transition from dream to reality. Waking to news about Tony Ty's inner psychological struggles to external realities and ongoing conflict. 3. Bruce tells Bernie he quit his job. Anthony Gaddy, also known as Tony Two-Face in The King's Omen, was a feared and notorious mobster with a lengthy criminal record involving serious offenses such as racketeering, extortion, bribery, forgery, and drug trafficking. He is last seen in Cleveland, Ohio, before his mysterious disappearance ignites investigations involving both the NYPD and local law enforcement. The media and associated characters speculate foul play, hinting at the high-level gang conflicts and internal betrayals underlying his vanishing. His history makes his disappearance both plausible as a victim of violent means and suspicious, reflecting the precarious nature of power in organized crime. Gaddy's story in the narrative serves to heighten tension around gang rivalries, law enforcement pressure, and the fraught, dangerous environment that Bruce Edwards and his associates navigate. His character personifies the violent underbelly of the mafia world, where loyalty is scarce and treachery common, echoing classic mobster archetypes grounded in real criminal history. The dialogue between Bruce and Bernie in this scene reveals deep emotional and psychological tensions amplified by external stressors tied to the gang-related violence and family crises surrounding them. Bernie's lines highlight her growing concern and fear for Bruce, who she perceives to be changing under the influence of his new work environment and his proximity to criminal elements. Her suspicion about his late nights and erratic behavior underline the fragility of their relationship and the strain caused by Bruce's involvement with the gang world. She also worries about their financial stability after Bruce quits his job, revealing practical anxieties alongside emotional ones. Bruce's responses mix defensiveness, frustration, and attempts to reassure. While he claims to keep his distance from gangsters and emphasizes his passion for cooking as a hopeful new path, his harsh dismissal of their old boss and frank remarks indicate latent bitterness and inner conflict. His insistence on positivity and keeping a plan underscores his desire to maintain control amid chaos, but also reveals a potentially fragile optimism. Their conversation about their son Roland and daughter Katrina brings familial trauma to the fore, with Bernie advocating for psychiatric help for Roland, while Bruce remains dismissive, invoking skepticism about therapy's effectiveness after trauma. This tension reveals differing coping mechanisms and perspectives on mental health within the family, Bernie's fear juxtaposed with Bruce's protective denial. Overall, the dialogue paints a picture of two people struggling to hold their family together in the face of external threats and internal breakdowns, a microcosm of survival and fractured loyalty within a violent world. Analytical highlights: tension and distrust. Bernie's suspicion contrasts with Bruce's defensiveness, portraying strain in their relationship. Financial and emotional stress. Quitting the job and uncertainty about income add real-world pressure to personal conflicts. Coping with trauma. The disagreement over mental health treatment reveals differing approaches to dealing with past and present trauma. Bruce's inner conflict. His surface optimism masks bitterness, frustration, and unresolved anger. Family under siege. The family dynamics reflect broader themes of loyalty, protection, and the heavy burden of violent legacies. Symbolism of change. Bruce's desire for a new career symbolizes hope, while his behavior suggests it's difficult to escape the past. 4. Bruce discusses Mackaveli, Watts, and Teddy Black. This dialogue between Old Man Bruce and the reporter offers a rich historical and socio-political context to The King's Omen, expanding the narrative scope beyond gang violence to include activism, ideology, and generational change within the African American community. Bruce's recounting of Mackaveli Watts frames him as a pivotal figure whose life straddled activism and a tough upbringing, mirroring real-life leaders and activists who straddled protest and underground resistance. Watts' roots in the snatch and grab crew headed by Angela Edwards and later influenced by Abraham Sharif, head of the activist group Mack joined once he left Angela's organization, lends complexity to his character, combining street smarts with broader social consciousness. The formation of Leave Seals, Woke Souls, symbolizes a movement bridging racial struggles with political activism, attracting diversity while focusing on racial injustice. A narrative reflecting historical movements like the Black Panthers and broader civil rights activism. Teddy Black's portrayal as a controversial, violent, and ambitious follower adds tension, illustrating fractures within activist and criminal circles. His connections to the Marcelin crime family and history of loyalty mixed with ambition echo common themes of distrust, betrayal, and contested leadership in such milieus. The reference to the Black Summer riots, instigated by Teddy Black himself, invokes powerful historical resonance, with social uprisings tied to racial injustice and police violence, emphasizing the ongoing cycle of systemic oppression and resistance. Bruce's summary reveals the nuanced balance between radical activism and more moderate leadership embodied by Watts, and how such figures become focal points for both hope and conflict within their communities, reflecting socio-political struggles in urban America. Analytical themes. Intersection of activism and crime. Characters like Watts and Teddy illustrate blended roles of community leadership and underground power. Generational dynamics. The contrast between Watts' philosophy and Teddy's radicalism highlights evolving ideologies. Historical resonance. The Black Summer riots echo real uprisings, grounding the narrative in social reality. Community impact. Leave Seals as a diverse, pro-justice group reflects grassroots response to systemic racism. Leadership and controversy. Power struggles and personalities shape movements and factions. Narrative depth. The dialogue enriches character backstories and situates personal stories within broader societal currents. This conversation provides crucial world building and thematic depth to the King's Omen, bridging crime narrative with social history and the complexities of activism within marginalized communities. 5. Teddy Black's Uprising. This scene presents a charged and emotionally intense speech by Teddy Black, addressing the brutal police violence against Rodney Patrick Coates, a 16-year-old Black teenager in Cleveland. Teddy's speech harnesses raw anger, detailed evidence, and a call to collective action, situating the narrative firmly within the thematic framework of racial injustice, police brutality, and community uprising. The use of the police footage plays a powerful role, providing undeniable proof of excessive force and brutality that shocks and mobilizes the crowd. Teddy's graphic recitation of the events, Rodney's arrest, the violent beating, and the severe head injury, elicits visceral reactions, symbolizing the physical and psychological trauma inflicted on Black communities by systemic racism. The speech also highlights the deliberate withholding of the offending officer's identity due to fear of retaliation, underscoring the terror and impunity that protect abusers and silence victims. Teddy frames this incident within a larger historical continuum of racial violence, linking it to previous uprisings and the ongoing struggle for justice. Teddy's fiery rhetoric, calling for blood and refusing to be silenced by ineffective leadership, paints him as a radical and uncompromising voice of resistance. His stance contrasts with Mackaveli Watts' more measured, peace-focused activism, indicating ideological tensions within the movement that mirror real historical dynamics. The scene concludes with a stark portrayal of Machiavelli's frustration, embodying the dilemmas faced by moderate leaders caught between radical pressures and the desire for order. Analytical insights. Use of evidence. Police footage functions as undeniable testimony fueling outrage and demand for accountability. Graphic detail. Specific, harrowing descriptions personalize systemic violence, evoking empathy and action. Fear and impunity. The anonymity of the officer underscores a culture of protection for law enforcement abuses. Historical context. The speech situates Rodney's case within a legacy of racial violence and resistance. Radical versus moderate activism. Teddy's militant tone contrasts with Machiavelli's restraint, reflecting real ideological divides. Mobilization and leadership. The speech serves as a rallying cry, highlighting fractures within leadership and community responses. This scene is a pivotal moment in The King's Omen that channels historical trauma and social justice struggles through charged rhetoric and emotional resonance, deepening the novel's engagement with race, power, and resistance. 6. Flex and Lysandra talk about the future of the business. Lysandra's colorful wedding cards represent a lighter, personal moment, contrasting with the serious, strategic concerns that dominate their conversation. The discussion quickly turns to the future leadership of the East region, highlighting the customary importance of lineage, loyalty, and respect in gang leadership succession. Flex's worry about Lysandra's father not being chosen because of his age introduces the theme of generational change and the balance between experience and vitality in leadership, common tensions in structured gang hierarchies. His suggestion that younger blood might take over reflects a realistic concern about maintaining power in a brutal, ever-evolving criminal landscape. Lysandra counters with pride in her father's legacy and experience, emphasizing a traditionalist view that values proven leadership and loyalty. Her protective stance against Flex's implied ambition reflects loyalty and respect for elder authority, typical in tightly knit gang families. Flex's admission of personal growth and readiness for responsibility reveals his ambition and desire for power, yet he faces skepticism about his readiness. This conversation encapsulates the push and pull between respect for established order and the hunger for advancement that fuels conflict in organized crime groups. Generational conflict. Older leaders revered yet face challenges from ambitious younger members. Loyalty and respect. Deeply valued, with elder leadership seen as stabilizing force. Ambition and readiness. Flex embodies the aspirational next generation, but with self-doubt and external skepticism. Personal versus organizational. Wedding cards symbolize personal life amid serious organizational power dynamics. Power dynamics. Conversation highlights underlying tension over control and legacy within gang families. 7. Murray gets in Teddy's ear. The dialogue between Teddy Black and Murray Tail reveals a critical power struggle within the leadership of Leave Seals, reflecting the broader themes of loyalty, ambition, and ideological conflict in The King's Omen. Murray Tail acts as a catalyst for Teddy, urging him to distance himself from Mackaveli Watts, whom he accuses of losing his commitment to the cause by softening over time due to endorsements and connections with white businessmen. Murray's blunt assessment points to a perceived betrayal, the idea that Watts has become more invested in personal gain and appeasement than in radical activism. Teddy's hesitation and refusal to engage with Mack's calls illustrates his internal conflict and strategic caution. While he agrees with Murray's critique, he fears igniting an internal war that could fracture the movement, showcasing his awareness of the delicate balance between unity and factionalism. Teddy's intuition that Mack's silence is a tactical move further complicates this dynamic. Murray's suggestion of initiating a vote to officially take leadership reflects a push for democratic legitimacy within the group, highlighting the tension between hierarchy and popular support. Teddy's recognition of Mack's loyal following underscores the real challenges in displacing an established leader. This conversation encapsulates the classic tension in movements between the established order and emerging leaders, portraying Teddy as an ambitious but pragmatic figure navigating the complexities of leadership transition amid ideological divides. Analytical highlights. Leadership transition. The dialogue explores tensions in passing leadership from a revered elder to a younger, more radical figure. Loyalty versus ambition. Murray's criticism of Mack's softness contrasts with Teddy's caution to avoid factional war. Strategic caution. Teddy's hesitance reflects a nuanced understanding of political and social dynamics. Democratic legitimacy. The idea of a vote introduces popular support as a governance mechanism. Movement fragmentation risk. The conversation reflects the perennial challenge of unity versus division in activist groups. Character depth. Teddy emerges as ambitious yet thoughtful, balancing idealism with practical constraints. 8. Bruce confesses to Lysandra. This scene unveils key emotional and narrative developments through the interaction between Bruce and Lysandra. Bruce's compliment on Lysandra's new hairstyle opens the scene on a warm, humanizing note, softening her otherwise serious persona and showing a moment of personal connection amid the pervasive tension. The wedding cards symbolize new beginnings and hope, contrasting sharply with the darker themes Bruce brings into the conversation. Bruce's confession that he was responsible for the brutal assault on the Dollar General manager introduces weighty guilt and trauma. His embarrassment and request for secrecy reveal the danger and moral complexity of their world, where violence is a currency but also a psychological burden. Lysandra's laughing reaction, though initially jarring, acts as a coping mechanism, a way to diffuse tension and reclaim agency by normalizing the extreme violence they face. Case in point when Lysandra tells Bruce that the intro to Goodfellas was more violent than that. It also highlights the violent nature of the Marcelin organization, and it showcases the desensitization of these gangsters, as such a brutal act as mutilating a man's tongue can bring humor to these kind of people, shows how far removed they are from having any kind of moral code. The dialogue also touches on Bruce's son Roland's critical condition and the family's emotional struggle, exposing the personal costs of their environment. Bruce's skepticism about psychiatric care and medication reflects distrust in institutions, a common theme in marginalized communities facing systemic neglect and exploitation. Flex's abrupt entrance, dismissiveness toward Lysandra's hair and Bruce's presence, and Lysandra's annoyance signal the ongoing hierarchical tensions and gender dynamics within the gang. Bruce's silent but firm response to Flex shows his assertiveness despite his outsider status. Analytical themes, humanizing moments. The scene blends intimate personal interactions with underlying tensions of violence and trauma. Violence and consequence. Bruce's admission reveals the psychological impact and moral complexity of their violent actions. Coping mechanisms. Lysandra's laughter exemplifies resilience and normalization of brutality as a survival tactic. Family and trauma. Discussions about Roland's injury and mental health highlight the emotional toll behind the criminal facade. Gender and hierarchy. Flex's behavior and the reactions underscore power relations and respect dynamics in the gang. Silent assertion. Bruce's nonverbal interaction with Flex conveys strength despite marginalization. 9. Mack's press conference. This scene of Mackaveli Watts at the press conference poignantly captures his leadership style and the weight of responsibility he carries as a prominent activist figure in the King's Omen. It provides a nuanced response to the Rodney Patrick Coates police brutality case, while reflecting his inner turmoil and conflict as a community leader. Mack opens with an acknowledgement of his silence, portraying it as a human moment of being at a loss for words due to the gravity of the tragedy. His statement sets a tone of urgency and moral clarity as he condemns the horrific police violence against Rodney without regard to the officer's race, emphasizing that the crime transcends racial lines and represents a systemic abuse of power. He questions the unchecked power granted to police, portraying them as ticking time bombs who act with impunity, highlighting systemic failures in accountability and the devastating human cost of police brutality. Mack's personal admission of anger and restraint offers a glimpse of his humanity behind the public figure. Mack's speech advocates for justice and accountability while rejecting racial essentialism or broad stereotyping, urging focusing on individual culpability rather than generalized hatred. This balanced view aims to maintain moral high ground and appeal widely while confronting racism and injustice directly. His refusal to take questions initially signals frustration and possible political pressure, but his eventual acknowledgement of Teddy Black's absence and call for dialogue hints at underlying tensions and the fractured leadership within the movement, emphasizing the complex dynamics between moderate and radical activism. Analytical highlights. Balanced condemnation. Mack condemns police brutality forcefully while avoiding racial generalization. Systemic critique highlights unchecked police power and lack of accountability as core issues. Humanizing leadership reveals personal anger balanced with public restraint and responsibility. Political caution. Initial refusal to answer questions suggests strategic communication challenges. Leadership rift mentions Teddy Black's absence. Foreshadowing internal political conflict, calls for justice. Firm demand for transparency, accountability, and protective measures for victims' families. This scene underscores Mackaveli What's role as the pragmatic, morally grounded voice within the King's Omen, providing a counterpoint to more radical figures while grappling with the challenges of leadership in a fractured activist movement. 10. Bruce offers his services. This scene captures the high-stakes tension, power struggles, and strategic decision-making within the Marcelin crime family, as well as the evolving role of Bruce despite his outsider status as a chef. Lysandra and Flex represent competing visions and ambitions. Lysandra upholds loyalty and respect for their aging patriarch, Pops, emphasizing experience and tradition, while Flex exhibits impatience and a hunger for leadership, worrying about Pop's age and suggesting a younger direction. The debate over the plan to handle Uncle Clay and the kidnapping of Clementine's son reflects the ruthless pragmatism and internal conflicts that characterize organized crime operations. Flex and Cecil's tough, violent attitudes contrast with Lysandra and Chuck's more measured concerns about risks and loyalties, highlighting varying perspectives on leadership and violence. Bruce's unexpected offer to take on the kidnapping task reveals his growing boldness and desire to assert himself within the group, challenging his no-name chef label and provoking animosity from Flex and skepticism from others. This moment underscores Bruce's gradual transformation from an outsider to a figure willing to take risks, even in dangerous territory. The exchange includes sharp, colorful dialogue with tension, humor, and power plays, providing insight into each character's personality and their relationships. The scene balances the deadly seriousness of gang business with vivid character dynamics and foreshadows future confrontations and alliances. Analytical elements. Power struggles, conflicts over leadership, and operational decisions illustrate challenges of loyalty, respect, and ambition. Generational dynamics. Debate between maintaining established leadership versus younger, more aggressive leadership. Violence as strategy. Cruelty and risk underscore the brutal realpolitik of gang life. Character dynamics. Bruce asserts himself despite skepticism, signaling personal growth and shifting roles. Tone and style. Dialogue blends tension with humor, enriching narrative texture. Foreshadowing. Bruce's active involvement hints at upcoming key developments and confrontations. In this scene, each character demonstrates a distinct approach to handling the rescue of Cleavon, which reveals their personality, priorities, and strategic thinking within the Marcelin crime family. Fletcher, Flex energetic, impatient, and pragmatic. He immediately dismisses Bruce's plan as too slow and impractical, focusing on immediacy to minimize risks to Cleavon. He values quick violent action and seems restless with delays or overly cautious strategies, showing his aggressive, no-nonsense style. Lysandra, loyal to her father's wishes and the established hierarchy. She enforces the directive to follow Cleotis's plan without question, valuing discipline and respect for authority over personal opinions. She also threatens to keep Flex in check when he gets out of line, showing her assertiveness and role as a stabilizing presence. Cecil, content as a soldier, he embraces violence as routine and is somewhat indifferent to strategic concerns, representing the muscle of the family. His brash humor and casual talk about killing people suggests a hardened, desensitized outlook. Chuck, tactical and cautious, opposing reckless moves to protect the family and maintain operational security. He worries about the public exposure of Flex and Cecil, reflecting concern for risk and long-term consequences beyond immediate action. Bruce, quiet yet confident. As an outsider, a chef, Bruce's offer to conduct the kidnapping himself is bold and unexpected. He argues his anonymity is an asset, indicating a thoughtful, strategic mindset focusing on stealth rather than violence. His calmness in face of Flex's aggression further establishes growing assertiveness. Flex's reaction: he is openly hostile toward Bruce, challenging his intrusion in the family's business, confirming the contested and hierarchical nature of power within the group. Overall, the scene highlights tension between loyalty versus ambition, aggression versus caution, and traditional power structures versus emerging players, with Bruce's offer signaling his evolving role from peripheral to central. 11. Teddy and Mack hash out their differences. The dialogue between Teddy Black and Mackaveli Watts in this scene reveals the ideological and personal rift between two prominent leaders within their movement and community in the King's Omen. Teddy's perspective: Teddy is passionate, militant, and frustrated with what he sees as Mack's inaction and attempts to appease both sides. He believes that the severity of racial injustices calls for direct, possibly violent action, feeling that moderate approaches have failed and that systemic oppression requires a bold, confrontational response. He is emotionally invested, invoking historical activism and challenging Mack to commit fully to the cause. Machiavelli's perspective: Mack represents a more strategic, measured, and pragmatic approach. He acknowledges the injustices and expresses moral clarity about the Rodney Patrick Coates case, but advocates for tactical, organized nonviolent resistance like boycotts and economic empowerment, strategic warfare. Mack fears that open confrontation will provoke deadly retaliation and cause more harm to their community, emphasizing the need for careful planning and collective upliftment rather than violence. Tension and respect: despite their disagreements, there is underlying respect rooted in shared history and past alliances. Mack's recollection of their earlier successful activism contrasts with Teddy's current militancy, highlighting the personal and ideological evolution over time. Their exchange reflects the complexities leaders face balancing idealism with pragmatism. Themes: the dialogue embodies the classic debate in social justice movements between radical action and pragmatic reform. It spotlights the dangers of escalating violence, the persistence of systemic oppression, and the struggles of leadership in navigating these turbulent waters. 12. Bruce's manipulation of Reagan Clementine. This scene highlights the intersection of social environment, personal ambition, and generational conflict within the narrative of the King's Omen through Bruce's encounter with Reagan Clementine, Brian Chambers. We find out that Reagan is the son of the leader of the Howling Wolves, Alfred Clementine, and through Reagan's interaction with Bruce, we find out that he has disassociated himself from his father and his criminal activities by changing his name. Bruce's approach: Bruce is cautious, nervous, yet strategic in initiating conversation with Reagan. He attempts to build rapport by focusing on Reagan's academic interests, chemical engineering, signaling a desire to connect through common ground rather than street life, which Reagan rejects as superficial and unconvincing. Reagan's attitude: Reagan displays skepticism and guardedness, making clear his desire to distance himself from the gangster lifestyle associated with his family. His initial annoyance and challenge to Bruce's claims underscore a generational divide and personal rejection of the violent legacy. Emotional disclosure: Bruce's candid sharing of his traumatic past and struggles with that life draws Reagan's attention, and this is Bruce's goal to gain his trust. Although Bruce's story is not entirely fabricated, he twists some parts to fit his narrative to reel Reagan in, revealing Bruce's Machiavellian nature to lure Reagan into his trap. This scene vividly portrays the impatience, racialized tension, and the precariousness of the operation as Flex, Cecil, and Bruce wait outside Tri-C East to retrieve Clementine's son, Reagan, Brian Chambers. Cecil's impatience reflects his no-nonsense, street-hardened mindset. His frustration with waiting and his blunt language about white people around them underscore his sense of alienation and discomfort in unfamiliar social environments. Cecil's impatience suggests a volatile nature, foreshadowing potential rash decisions if the wait extends. Flex, although similarly out of his element, tries to appear more composed, but shares Cecil's uncertainty about Bruce, suspecting an underlying agenda. This signals trust issues and tension within their group, amplified by their high-stakes mission. Bruce, in contrast, takes a deliberate, patient approach, showing maturity and strategic thinking. His interaction with Reagan, shifting from nervous to serious, shows his resolve to connect on a human level and accomplish their goal through subtlety rather than aggression. Reagan's conversation expresses the trauma of being forced into a lifestyle he rejects, revealing the generational and ideological divide within families affected by gang legacies. His guarded attitude and candor about his fears humanize the stakes of the kidnapping. The decision to move to a bar underscores a need for relief and informal bonding moments amidst the tension, highlighting the human side of these hardened characters. Scene analysis. The scene powerfully weaves themes of cultural displacement, trust, trauma, and the tension between street life and aspirations for a better future, enriching the King's Omen with emotional and social complexity. 13. Commissioner Jordan Banks and Mack's conversation. This scene featuring Commissioner Jordan Banks and Mackaveli Watts at Mack's home addresses themes of trust, danger, and political realignment amid police corruption and social unrest. Mack's confidence amid danger, despite threats and killings targeted at him, Mack shows remarkable fearlessness, even accepting the possibility of an early death. His stoic acceptance of risk highlights his long experience in precarious leadership and activism within a hostile system. Commissioner Banks' wariness. Jordan Banks exhibits discomfort and caution about being at Mack's house, aware of the enemies watching both men. His wariness underscores the pervasive danger in Cleveland's law enforcement and activist circles, reflecting the real stakes for both sides. Mack's warning. Mack reveals an imminent police raid, but without specifics, positioning the conversation as an urgent heads-up aimed at allowing smoother navigation of forthcoming events. This shows Mack's strategic mindset and his desire to protect his community from harsh law enforcement actions perceived as excessive or unjust. Critique of Teddy Black. Mack warns that Teddy has grown too reckless and that his actions threaten to bring tragedy on innocent people, illustrating tensions between moderation and militancy within their movement. Complex internal dynamics. Banks mentions Rashawn Edwards, another figure with a complicated history, suggesting nuanced relationships and difficult loyalties within the activist and law enforcement communities. Family and vulnerability. Mack's revelation about his son, who is deaf and away from public scrutiny, humanizes him, showing a softer side beneath the activist's tough exterior. Force corruption context. Analytical themes, fearlessness versus wariness. Mack's boldness contrasts with Banks' caution, reflecting different survival strategies. Strategic warnings. Information sharing as protective maneuver amidst impending police action. Leadership tensions. Mack's critique of Teddy frames the debate over activism styles and consequences. Humanizing leadership. Family details reveal vulnerabilities behind public activism. 14. The brutal execution of Alfred Clementine and his son. This bar scene with Bruce and Reagan in The King's Omen serves as a poignant illustration of generational and psychological tension amid the legacies of crime, trauma, and identity. Bruce's protective instincts. Despite Reagan being intoxicated and difficult to handle, Bruce's concern for his well-being shows a protective, almost paternal instinct, underscoring Bruce's maturation and commitment to his mission. His practical approach to ensuring Reagan's safe transport contrasts with the chaotic environment around them. Reagan's vulnerability and defiance. Reagan's drunken state, reluctance to accept help, and candid sharing about forced exposure to violence highlight the trauma and internal conflict many young people face in gang-impacted environments. His insistence on making his own choices reflects a desire for autonomy and rejection of a violent legacy. Tension between care and chaos. The dialogue between Bruce, Flex, and Cecil outside the bar provides a backdrop of impatience, distrust, and strain within their group, illustrating the pressures and fractures common in criminal enterprises. Humanizing the abstract, Reagan's drunkenness and candidness amid jokes and tension humanize the broader social issues the novel tackles, reminding the reader that behind every crime story are real, vulnerable individuals. Turning to Alfred's reaction upon learning his son has been kidnapped. Shock and rage. Alfred's immediate impulse is to lash out, evidenced by his threat and urgent call to action. This reaction reflects the primal parental instinct to protect family at all costs, escalating the stakes dramatically. Desperation and power dynamics. His questioning of, how do you want to play this, when threatened with harm to his son underscores harsher realities of negotiation and power in the criminal underworld. This intense scene from The King's Omen dramatically explores the brutal and violent reality of gang power struggles, loyalty, and moral conflict. Setting and mood. The meeting in the dark alley, with broken and beaten Cleavon and the emotional reunion of Alfred and Reagan, sets a grim tone emphasizing vulnerability amid violence and fear. Character dynamics. Alfred's reverent yet terrified awe of Flex, who embodies a threatening, almost mythic figure, starkly contrasts with Bruce's cold, Grim Reaper-like demeanor, reflecting the harsh realities these men live in. Bruce's more contemplative mood amid the chaos reveals his internal moral struggle with the violence he helped unleash for a greater good. Violence and ruthlessness. Cecil's brutal treatment of Cleavon accentuates the cruelty and unchecked aggression in this world. The threat and use of violence are to enforce respect and control. The chilling execution of Alfred and Reagan by Flex is a shocking act of ruthless power, breaking previously understood rules and order, escalating the tension and stakes significantly. Power struggles and discord. The scene reveals a fractured hierarchy and conflicting approaches to power, Bruce's desire for control and measured action clashes with Flex's impulsive, violent messaging. Flex's defiance and claim over the organization assert a violent usurpation of authority, while Bruce's reluctant participation shows his uneasy deeper involvement. Symbolism of the burning cigarette. The cigarette's slow burn amidst dead bodies metaphorically represents life's fragility and the fleeting nature of power, loyalty, and existence in this violent world. Aftermath and consequences. The phone call of Cleotis and the surprising promotion of Bruce to head chef create a complex juxtaposition of reward and horror. The mundane call contrasts with the brutal digging that follows, symbolizing ongoing cycles of violence and survival.